Healing begins in the body, but awakening touches everything: relationships, purpose, identity, pleasure, and truth. Join Bill Reel and Teresa Hobbs as they explore the real work of becoming a healthier you. Welcome to Almost Awakened.
Welcome to another episode of the Almost Awakened podcast. I'm gonna say it differently. I'm gonna say I'm the host, Bill Reel, and I'm interviewing Teresa Hobbs, who is my co-host with the podcast. But you started co-hosting this podcast not too long ago, about a month ago, and we put out some great content. Folks who listen to this work have been highly positive of the podcast episodes that have come out recently. And those are projects that that you and I have been working on. And a lot of them were episodes that you designed the topic and the conversational flow of those. And so today what we thought, and we always had this in mind, was that we'd get a few episodes in and we'd give you a chance to talk about your life in ways that will help the listener and the viewer to sense some of the things that you've been through, see why it is that you do the work that you do, and what it is both in your experience and in your education that could be helpful to folks who are going through things that you offer help on. And so let's start, Teresa. First, let me say, how are you doing and how's the day going? I sort of know that, but I want the listener to get a feel for how things are going in your life.
Good. Things are really good now. And I'm very excited about what's unfolding for me. And you'll understand more when you hear more of my story. My story is a pretty intense and drastic one. But the reason I want to share it is because if there's any part that resonates with somebody else or wakes you up to something that could be going on in your own experience, I want to just illustrate to people that there is a way to move through that, to move out of it, to find healing. So I hope that it's helpful in that way.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to when you were a kid, and let's just ask how was your personality? What was your energy like? What was your early childhood? What did it consist of?
Yeah, so I was a really, really shy kid. I was really introverted, extremely independent, and I was, coined the sensitive one, and typically the black sheep of my family. So I had not a big family. I had one older brother who was like 2 years older than me, and then my mom and dad, and they were kind of like the threesome. They all liked to do the same things, and I was the one in the family that didn't like to do the same things, and uh, sort of got blamed for everything, I guess, because I was the one who made it so we couldn't have as much fun. So I think it was, looking back, I was just different. I came out sensitive, and it was pretty apparent from the get-go.
What were some of the signs even back then that your nervous system was running a little fast, or that you were holding a lot inside?
Well, I was afraid of everything. So again, that super extreme shyness. I had a big imagination, and so my mind used that to try to figure out all the potential dangers that could befall me. So I was paranoid about kidnappers. I thought about that all the time, wondering, when somebody's going to climb in my window and steal me in the middle of the night. Um, I just was very, avoidant of any type of danger. I was risk averse. Yeah, I was just a really sensitive kid, a lot of emotions, and I don't think my mom or dad really knew what to do with me.
Looking back now, like, how would you describe what you were feeling inside? Like, you're saying it showed up as being afraid of everything, but do you want to speak at all, maybe, to what that felt like inside?
I felt isolated. I felt, I had all these big thoughts and emotions, and I think, when I would express them or try to tell my parents what was going on, I was they didn't know what to do with me, and so it just made me feel so alone and isolated, and like I had to figure it out on my own. And so I was constantly hypervigilant. I remember, my parents would leave us alone. My brother was maybe 10 and I was 8, and they would go do grown-up things. And being left at home, I would sit by the window and I would peek out through the curtain and just stare at, the road and the cars going by just to try and see if anybody was coming to hurt me. I saw, bad people everywhere. I remember as a kid, I think my parents let me watch too much news, and they watched a lot of those like unsolved mysteries and, and things like that. So I got a lot of ideas as a kid, and I just assumed that there was all this stuff was happening all the time. And so we lived near a open alfalfa field, and there was a ditch and a canal nearby. And I remember thinking that, there were people out there constantly burying dead bodies. I just assumed that people found dead bodies everywhere. So, I mean, these were telltale signs that I wasn't I wasn't a relaxed kid who felt safe in the world. I was so focused on all the things that could potentially go wrong.
Um, Symptoms, anything else you want to say about uh, that sort of early moments, what you were feeling, or things that were showing up in your body, or things that
Yeah.
maybe your family noticed, your parents noticed that on some level they were concerned about or felt some need to address?
Yes. So my mom, bless her soul, she tried really hard. And, when I was having nightmares as a kid, and so she at one point took me to go see a psychiatrist. But it happened to be a male psychiatrist. And so I was terrified. I couldn't talk to him. I was afraid of men in general. And here's this scary guy that I'm supposed to tell all my problems to, and I just couldn't. So she attempted to support me the best way she knew how. And I was also going through a lot of, other types of trauma at this time. So, once I got into my teenage years, 11, 12, 13, I I sorta intermingled some personal trauma, and it overlapped with coming into the Mormon church. And so I had also, pretty much from age 12 to, I don't know, 18, 20, whatever, extreme terror of, what was gonna happen to me in the afterlife, a lot of internal shame, so many trauma reactions. So I was hyper vigilant still at the time, fearing kidnappers and people that were gonna hurt me. But I also was, constantly preoccupied by, my value, my worth, my goodness, um yeah, whether or not I was a good person, whether or not, I needed to repent 20,000 times a day. I mean, just all the typical scrupulosity. And, I think I started to cope using, um, OCD, obsessive compulsive things, trying to control things in my environment to sort of make myself feel more safe inside. So there were so many things in that early part of my life that you could see a nervous system in trouble. You could see someone who was under a lot of extreme stress and didn't really have any support or help, because at the time, again, this is not to blame anyone in my life at that time. Number 1, I kept it hidden because I didn't see it well received, because I don't think, my family knew what to do about it. And then they didn't have a framework for it. I don't even think people at the time knew what anxiety was or could name panic, or, and I was dealing with all of that stuff. And so, looking back, I was just an extremely stressed out kid who didn't have enough resources and who didn't have even context for what I was feeling. I didn't even have a name for it. So I just did the best that I could to cope, which involved trying to control things in any way I could, even things that didn't really matter. That, just having those compulsive tendencies to try and be perfectionistic, or keep things clean in a certain way, or whatever it was. I had all kinds of different things, and that's what I used to cope. That's what my parts found useful.
Um, Health professionals that you were seeing, you said you were seeing a psychiatrist. Did they have any resolution for you? Did they have any thoughts on what it was you were dealing with and what were the best ways to address it? And then I want to ask you if any of that was helpful.
No. So psychiatrist I only saw one time when I was little. I was probably like 9. And then I did start to see a therapist, I think in my early 20s, I believe. And that was to address social anxiety. So I had so many things, lumped on. But no, that didn't help. I remember going to sessions and it was just torment just to get through the session because there was so much anxiety and I didn't really get any tools. And these weren't bad people. They just, I don't think really knew how to address that stuff. So no, I didn't get a lot of support or help.
How did that feel to you? I mean, you're a young person. You say this started off really young. Do you know what ages were you at when you were seeing a psychiatrist or other health professional?
Super young when I was, when my mom took me. Then I remember I started to see a therapist in California when I lived there, and I was 25 at the time.
Yeah.
So
As folks are meeting with you, they're listening to you, they're hearing the symptoms that you're dealing with. They sense that you're reacting to the world differently than other folks around you, and you're not sensing that they've got any really good solutions. Maybe say more about what you felt at that time. What kind of conclusions you were coming to, or assessments you were coming to about yourself, and in regards to the medical folks not really having something that could help.
I think I think the conclusion I made about health professionals, that was probably my first introduction into sort of learning to distrust authority because I didn't feel like people could help me, so I was on my own. So, but I felt that way as a young kid too. I was very hyper independent, and so part of what I actually did is I read books. I tried to. I was in the self help section a lot, trying to figure out what this thing was. I made conclusions about where my social phobia came from. Oh, it might have been this incident when I was in school, or the issues I had with shame was because of this incident when I was a child, different things like that. And then I felt like, that's what's interesting about it is at the time I was correlating it to maybe one event or one situation. And then I felt like, okay, well, if I just fix that event or fix that situation or heal that event or get rid of those emotions from that event, then this social anxiety will go away, or, whatever emotional symptoms I'm having will go away. So at the time I was experiencing a lot of anxiety. Um, and yeah, mostly social anxiety. That was the biggest thing. So I just kind of was floundering, reading different books on spirituality and different books on, mental health and emotional healing, trying to figure out the right thing for me. And then also attempting, like I said, therapy, but that just didn't really do anything. And I didn't have any other framework for how to work with this. And at the time, people really didn't have a framework for how to work with this.
I
Uh,
know in our conversations with each other, there's a recognition that as you're leaning into self-help advice, practices, information, that you get down paths where you think something is the thing, and it helps a little here, and then maybe it ends up, doesn't help as much as you need, and so you move on to the next tool. But I have to imagine you begin to feel a sense of helplessness or hopelessness, and uh, I have to imagine that felt pretty serious.
yes, but again, there's something about me that I think is a little different than most people. I I think even though I was so frustrated, I have a dogged determination. So there was some part of me that was like, "Well, I'll figure it out. I don't know what it's gonna be, but I'll figure it out." And I am also pretty damn creative, so I would find all kinds of creative solutions to work with my limitations. So, for example, I had part of my social anxiety presented itself in classroom settings. I felt so uncomfortable in small rooms, or, if someone's gonna close the door, I'd get really claustrophobic. So I didn't feel like I could go to a traditional school, and I desperately wanted to go to college. And so I had to get, creative about what my career was gonna look like. And so I was like, well, maybe I could do something outdoors that had more freedom, didn't have closed doors, didn't make me feel like I had to be in one place all the time. And so my first career actually ended up being with horses. I decided I was going to be an equestrian trainer, and I went to school in West Virginia when I was 22, I believe, and you know, bought a horse and had a whole plan to have that as my career because that was me trying to find a way to function in the world with my limitations. So, yes, it was frustrating, and I have always tried to find a way to compensate, to figure it out, to, come up with a creative solution.
You and I have had a bunch of conversations about the path that you went down to try various things, and I wonder if you could maybe share with the audience for a moment the various tools you tried at some point along the way, maybe some of your thoughts as you uh, learned about and sought out whether this was maybe the issue and this is the tool to fix it, sort of what that part of the journey was like.
Yeah, well, so, I had all the emotional symptoms going on for a long time. And then I went to equestrian school when I was like 21, 22, and came home. Felt a little burned out by that. Came home and did some different jobs. I did a lot of office work. And so I did that for like a year and then decided, well, I was in a relationship that ended up breaking my heart. And so actually, to be fair, I ended up running away to California, working on a horse farm for a year because I was really sort of like escaping the pain of that relationship. I tended to do that a lot in my early life. I would move around and try different things, and I really liked sort of experiencing new places. And so I did that. Started working at this equestrian farm, and it was a working student position, so it was kind of like an internship. And I had my horse there, and it was in Sacramento, so it was like super super hot. And I started noticing the first physical symptoms. So I had all these emotional symptoms, social anxiety and all that kind of stuff, which I was trying to figure out. And then I get to like 25 at this time, and I start seeing like these physical symptoms showing up, and that started to concern me. And there was, fatigue, and I started getting dizzy. I had like this low blood sugar, which, by the way, I actually had low blood sugar when I was a young kid too. That was a weird symptom I always had as a kid. Started noticing mood swings and just symptoms of extreme rage that would come out. I had a hard time with the heat and the temperature fluctuations. Um, what else? I mean, so many different things. Oh, I started having these mini blackouts. That was really scary. And that was the first symptom that I thought, like, what the hell is going on with me? And so that that was the first time I realized there was something physical, that I separated from emotional. It was like there's this physical thing that's happening to my body now. Um, and so yeah, are you talking about those symptoms or are you talking about more the emotional symptoms?
I think those or the emotional ones, but those ones are great because what I want to ask next is because I know this has come out in our conversations that we've had is all of these either diagnoses from what you're reading, what folks are saying here, you have the symptoms of this. And
Mhm.
then also as you're seeking out all of this self-help to deal with these things, you're self-diagnosing as well. Um, name name some of the things that you thought you had or thought you were dealing with, and anything else you want to say about each of those that you name.
Yeah, so I didn't have a name for them. I don't think I other than social anxiety. I think that was one I self-diagnosed as. Uh, but I don't think I had a name for things until I started seeing practitioners. So I went to traditional doctors after I had all these weird symptoms come up. Traditional doctors tested my blood, said it was normal, and, sent me on my way. They didn't do any further diagnoses. They never gave me any answers, nothing. So from there, I went to other doctors. So I remember seeing like an MD who was just who would practice a little out of his scope, and he specialized in Candida. So of course I went to see him, and he was like, "Well, you have Candida infection." And then he treated that, and that was going to solve all my problems. But that didn't solve it. And so I started collecting all these different diagnoses. Candida was one of them. Hormone imbalance. I started going to naturopathic physicians, and they tested my hormones, and they were totally off. So then it was like, oh, I've got hormone imbalance. And then I went to a acupuncturist who gave me a test for my adrenals called an adrenal stress index test, and that came back showing that I had adrenal fatigue. So my adrenals were all messed up. Sorry. And
I don't mind bad words here on the Almost
okay.
Open podcast, so no biggie.
So that was another one that got collected. And then I went to see another medical doctor, and he tested me and found that I had Epstein-Barr virus. So that was another thing. So just along the way, there were just all these different labels that you get. And then you start chasing all of those things because you're like, oh, well, I have this thing wrong. Now I'll just try to fix that and then I'll feel better. And so it was a years and years of this, of taking hormones and trying to address Epstein-Barr and trying to address stress. Because all of these, like, I knew after a certain point that these were because of stress. I had connected it to, well, yeah, I was a stressed kid. I had a stressful life. I felt stressed for a long time, but I didn't know how to fix it. I, you just keep trying to sort of do all these things on the medical front, taking supplements and, uh, I don't know. There were so many different crazy things I did. I did acupuncture for a long time. I took a lot of really nasty things. I did diets and cleanses. I did, I don't know how many people are familiar with the functional medicine route or the holistic sort of route, but anyone who's been there, we sort of say, like, you go down the rabbit hole of this, and there are just so many crazy things you do because you're so desperate, because you're just trying to fix this thing that you've got going wrong, and you get lots and lots of different labels. And what's interesting though is the one label I refused, like, I just avoided it like the plague, which is really what I had, but it was chronic fatigue syndrome. So this CFS or ME, which is myalgic encephalomyelitis, like, that's a term that encapsulates a wide variety of strange, unexplainable symptoms, essentially. And I didn't want that label, so I did everything I could to sort of avoid it.
Did you have a moment where things started to get better? And maybe you had lots of moments where things seemed like they were starting to get better.
Yes. So after I had the diagnosis for adrenal fatigue, that was when I was probably 28, I would guess. I found this book and read all about adrenal fatigue, and I changed my diet a little bit, and I really tried to reduce stress, and I took some supplements that were targeted for my adrenals and started doing yoga, and I started to improve a little bit. I started to get a little bit more capacity back. My fatigue decreased. The blackout spells got a little bit better. My digestion got a little bit better, and I was like, "Oh, cool. This is great." So I decided that I was gonna kinda jump back into life because I felt like I'd been so limited for about 2 or 3 years. And so from there, I changed position at work. I ended up taking a more stressful role, and I worked more hours and took on more responsibility, and then at that point, I think I was, let's see, so yeah, it was from, like, 28 to, like, 30 that I started getting a little bit better. And then I felt like I was so behind in life. My friends had all, been getting married and having children, and I felt like I was lagging behind. And so I decided I needed to start dating. So, so at 30, I was working at this engineering firm. It was mostly male. And one day met this cute guy who was an engineer and decided to chase a relationship because I thought, well, that's going to mean that I finally arrived. I'm going to have the relationship. Maybe we'll have kids. Like, then I will be like everybody else. And this is what I should be doing. So I was very focused on trying to make all of that happen. And unfortunately, the relationship wasn't healthy because I wasn't healthy. He also wasn't healthy, but it was a very, hmm, what's the word? It was something that kind of threw me. I didn't expect what unfolded from that relationship and how it caused me to spiral. But that was a big turning point for me.
You say it caused you to spiral. Say more about that. It sounds like, again, I know the story, right? So, I want you to explain to the audience that, here you have this moment where you're getting better, you're improving, you're taking on more responsibility at work, you feel yourself having more capacity, you enter a relationship, and when any of us get into an unhealthy relationship, none of us know what that's going to look like or that's going to entail. And in the process of that, your last little bit of your answer from the previous question, you indicate that things, you said spiral, you indicate that things got worse. So say more about that.
Yeah. Sorry. It's interesting when anybody reflects back on that moment, like I do great just talking about it. But when there's reflection, that's when I feel
Yeah.
it. So I think in that relationship, I was trying so hard to make it mean something. Again, I felt like I was so far behind in life. And I remember when I met my partner at the time, I thought like, wow, he's the best I could ever do. I just remember thinking on paper he looked so great. He was an engineer, project manager. He was so intelligent, and he's a he's a complicated person. I think because he was a good person and also had some challenges. And I knew from the beginning of that relationship that something was off. I didn't feel trust. I don't think I was in a good place emotionally to even engage in a relationship, but that's not what I cared about at the time. I cared about being normal. I cared about moving on in life. I cared about you know where I was in life and what that meant to the rest of the world. I wasn't really tuned into what I needed or what was emotionally healthy for me. So I picked this relationship, and it was difficult from the beginning. There was a lot of competitiveness, there was challenges in communication, there was a lack of compatibility, there were a lot of red flags, and I went into it anyway. And and I got stuck in it. I got stuck in it. There were several times I tried to get out of it, to there were things that didn't feel good to me, and he happened to be very good at sort of reining me back in. Whenever I wanted to bail, that's when he would show up and, say, "Oh, well, no," he'd give me all the things that I was hoping for, what I wasn't getting in the relationship, then he would provide that, and I would be like, "Oh, okay. Well, I must not be seeing this right," or I guess he's gonna change or whatever it was. And this went on and on and on. And then there was a point about a year in where there was an extreme betrayal, and it just something broke in me. Something just fractured, and it was so painful. And then this is like it's there's shame around how I responded to it, but I also understand it. So I have I have one part of me that still feels really shameful about it, and I have another part that can bring compassion to who I was at that time and how I coped. But even though there was this extreme betrayal that affected me deeply, I couldn't meet the pain of it. And so I took him back, and I stayed with him for another 4.5 years, 5 years. And it was it was just a continual pattern of mistrust and paranoia and fear and efforting to try to get him to see me or value me or whatever it was. I was trying so hard to fix what got fractured, but I was trying to fix it externally. So rather than kind of slowing down and tuning into myself and meeting the parts of me that felt so wounded and being able to feel the pain of whatever I felt, whether I felt devalued or the trust was broken, whatever it was, I couldn't meet that. It felt so overwhelming, and I didn't have the tools, and so I just kept trying to fix it externally. if I show up this way, or if I try it from this approach, or if I do this or this or this. I mean, I'm dogged in my ability to come up with creative solutions and to problem solve. And I get stuck in that sometimes. And I tried way too hard to make that relationship work, to fix things, to whatever. And then I continued to just it it affected me physically. So, when I met him, I was on an upward trajectory. I was feeling pretty good. Things were stabilizing. Then as soon as I met him, all the things that happened in that relationship, it just started declining, like, extremely. And my health got worse. And then I felt even more pressure to try and show up and perform in ways that a normal person would, because he wanted to live a normal life. But because I was limited in my, energy levels, and I had all kinds of crazy symptoms showing up, our life got smaller and smaller. And that affected him, and it affected me, and it affected our relationship even more. And so, yeah, eventually I got so sick that I I asked for more support, and he at that time told me he wasn't willing and wanted more things from life, which I totally understood. I wouldn't want to be with someone who was that sick and that limited. I get it. Everybody wants to live their own life, and so I think he put me in a position where I just had to leave. So I made the choice to exit the relationship.
Um, you talk about the beginning part of your life and having the social anxiety, what you don't have any words for yet, but which is chronic fatigue. And you talk about the low moments then, and then you have this moment where you're beginning to get better, and then you're in this relationship, and it sends you crashing. Um, Comparing those two moments, the issues in childhood and young adulthood, the issues that show up in this unhealthy relationship that send you back to that place and maybe worse. It seems from your words you're indicating worse. Anything you want to say about where you're at this point in terms of what thoughts are in your mind, how your body is responding to symptoms, and what the day-to-day world looks like for you?
I was just getting by. So at this point, towards the end of our relationship, fatigue was extreme. I would have a sensation in my body like it was just powering down to like 20%. It's a really hard thing to describe for people who've never felt it. Uh, because they like the reason I also don't like the term chronic fatigue syndrome is because it sounds like, oh, you're just tired. Oh, that's hard. I'm so sorry. It's a cascade of so many symptoms, and the fatigue and chronic fatigue syndrome is unlike anything you could ever imagine. It's debilitating. It's not just like you need to go take a nap. It's not about sleep. It's your cells are not getting the energy they need. It's almost like as if when you're out of oxygen and you feel this like sense of starvation. It's awful, and it's scary, and it's destabilizing. And so I had that going on, and then I still had to show up for my job, which I was I always felt so competent and good at my job, but I started to feel like that was just slipping. So I was losing my sense of self and competency at work, and hating my job. Just it was drudgery, and I just had so many difficulties. One of the other layers of symptoms I had was an immune response. So I would get sore throats all the time, felt like I was sick all the time. That's another aspect of chronic fatigue syndrome is you can feel like you have the flu like all the time. So, body aches and muscle soreness and difficulty exercising. There's something called post-exertional malaise, which is where you exercise and do something normal and you just feel like you've been hit by a bus the next day, or sometimes it's a couple days later. And there were times in the relationship where I tried to, I was exercising, I was, running and jogging, and then I just hit this wall where I couldn't do it anymore. I had moments. There was a time when this was in 2011, and my boyfriend and I had gone to hike the Narrows, and I remember thinking, I can't do this. Like, there's no way my body's going to be able to do this. But he wanted so desperately to go, and he wanted to go with this other couple, and I gave in. I said, okay, I guess I can do this. And the whole way there, I kept telling people, you guys, I'm not feeling good. Like I had the symptoms coming up. I felt like crap. And they were like, you'll be fine. No big deal. You'll be fine. And so I just counted my own knowing and went on the trip anyway. And 5 miles in, I hit a wall and I got so sick. I had to crawl back. You know, I remember my boyfriend took my backpack and we just slowly made our way back to the start. Like if for people who don't know, the Narrows is in Zions Canyon, Zions National Park, and it's a 17-mile hike. So 5 miles in, I had to sort of abandon, and there's nobody to come pick you up. You're like stuck in the middle of nowhere. So I had to go backwards, and we met the shuttle bus that drops you off the very next morning. It was a horrible experience, and I was really disappointed in myself that I hadn't listened to my inner knowing, that I really didn't have the capacity, and I was trying to appease other people and push beyond, what was available for me. So it showed up in ways like that. You just feel terrible all the time. And yeah, and I was working with still at the time working with a naturopathic physician, trying to work on hormones. And I was also at the time thinking that I might want to get pregnant and have kids. And I also had, on some level, just knew my body would never be able to do that. I just didn't have the capacity. Um, and so there was just so much going on, a lot of emotional distress over wanting to live a normal life, not being able to, feeling deeply disconnected from myself because I wasn't honoring my own needs, uh, being constantly hypervigilant and paranoid about what my partner was doing or not doing. It was awful. It was a horrible, horrible time in my life.
You mentioned being disconnected from yourself. And I think, this audience is made up primarily of people who are seeking information resources in the middle of or on the back end of deconstructing the religion that they were in. And many of them on along a very different line, but it's the same, I think, sort of feeling. They report being disconnected from themselves, that this thing requires you to put on a mask and to be a thing, and you're
Mhm.
not that thing, but you want to make everyone happy. You want to maintain this image of your life that everyone has set up for you. And you end up staying in it way longer than you would like to because you're disconnected from yourself. And I get the same feeling, in this conversation with you. As again, we've talked about these things before, but in a really unhealthy relationship that you knew at a really grounded level wasn't healthy, wasn't good for you, you shouldn't be there. And yet, as you said, you stayed years longer, hoping that you would just be wrong and it would turn out to be the thing you'd always wanted. And it wasn't. And I want to give you a chance maybe to speak to any greater length about that disconnection and what that felt like.
Yeah, I essentially lost myself. That's the best way I can describe it. Like I was no longer tuning into my own authority. I was so externally focused on my partner and how I could get him to meet my needs that I wasn't actually meeting myself. And I was self-abandoning and hoping that he would eventually see me, which would mean that I was okay. So I chased his dreams and forgot about my own. It was just all, yeah, I had no connection to my internal compass. And I knew it was there. I don't wanna say I had no connection because I whisperings. I remember after I got out of the relationship, I had the awareness of like, I knew it wasn't good, but I just stayed anyway, right? You just override that. And that's what I mean by disconnected. There were many, many times you'd have an internal knowing, and there was this other part of your brain, this protective survival part that's like, no, 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 no. If we just do this, we'll fix it. Like if we just stay focused on doing these things, then we'll make it all better. Like it's it's trying to, I don't know, like I bless its soul, it was trying its best to help me, but no, it was the wrong information. Um so yeah, that's what I mean by disconnected from myself. It was yeah, I just shut down my own internal knowing.
You know, with the connection I just made a moment ago in regards to the audience and they're feeling disconnected for entirely different reasons. It is a relationship, whether it's a relationship with a person as your primary partner, whether it's a relationship with parents or children, whether it's a relationship with a system that one belongs to and is raised in and feels like they have an obligation to it. Maybe talk for a moment in your particular instance in this relationship with a partner where it's really unhealthy and you stay way longer than what it was good for you. Why stay so long? Why is it so hard to leave an unhealthy relationship, especially one that you've put so much emphasis on the front end that this has got to be the thing?
Yeah, so first thing first is that we're wired to stay in what's familiar. So it was familiar, it was known. There was a lot of fear about what would happen on the outside, and I didn't wanna fail. I didn't wanna fail at the relationship. I wonder if people, I don't know how many people can relate, but how many people might have felt that way about religion, like, I don't wanna fail at it, like this constant need to keep seeking it or making it work somehow, not wanting to finally call it like, wow, this really doesn't work for me, or I can't, and a lot of the fear of failure wasn't about, and part of it was like I didn't want to fail, but it was I didn't want people on the outside to see me fail at the relationship. I didn't want them to think I was a quitter. I didn't want them to think that I maybe just didn't try hard enough, or all the things. And I was so actually humiliated because I did take him back after a really public betrayal. Actually, that made it even worse. And so the fact that I stood by his side, I didn't wanna have to admit that I was wrong. I didn't wanna have to I didn't wanna swallow that pill. So I just kept staying in there because I wanted to prove to the rest of the world, like, "Oh, he's a really great guy." What do you mean? And he was. Again, I don't wanna say that he was a bad person. He's a human being, and he had a ton of wonderful qualities, but he just wasn't good for me. And so, yeah, that was another part of it, is just I was so fixated on not failing, not having people look at me and say, "Oh, I told you so," or "Wow, you just couldn't hack that, could you?"
So what happens next? It um, help the audience see where it goes from there. Does it get better? Does it get worse? What is the epiphany moment, and what makes this transition from being an unhealthy relationship that has you going downhill, has you not feeling like you belong here, and yet you're, for a lack of a better term, you're pretending it's all going to be great? What changes?
My health, I got too sick. So I reached such a point of dysfunction that I couldn't keep playing the role anymore. And I asked him for help, and he said he couldn't, and you know, and I just knew. I was like, wow, he's never gonna show up for me. He's never gonna help me. He doesn't want to. He wants other things. I have I have tried everything. Like, I just hit a wall. And so I decided to leave. And at the time I was on reduced hours. I was only able to work about 32 hours a week. If that. I was using a ton of PTO just to get to 32 so I could say that I was full time. And I didn't have the money to sort of move out on my own. I'd gotten into a little bit of debt with him trying to keep up with his lifestyle. And so I ended up having to move home. So I moved back in with my parents. And I remember when I moved out, I was too sick to even move all my stuff. So the first move was just my stuff moved into my old childhood bedroom. And I was like, well, I'll deal with the big move later. I just couldn't. And so he and I were still on friendly terms. There was still interaction. We had a dog and a cat together. So that made things complicated. And I just spent that first 6 months of our breakup just trying to get adjusted to it. And yeah. And eventually I'm laughing because there were so many moments that I just got don't know, face planted with him. I don't know. Anyway, there was another moment where there was some betrayal, and that's when I was like, wow, okay, got to move out now. So that after 6 months of us being friendly, some stuff happened, and I ended up moving out fully, and then I stayed with my parents for the next year and a half, still seeking, healing. I at that point was seeing a specialist in Pennsylvania. I flew out to Pennsylvania, spent thousands of dollars to work with someone who specialized in adrenal fatigue, and he was fabulous. He was a great doctor, amazing person. Really got a lot from him. He's very, very supportive. But that wasn't enough because there was like all the underlying stuff was not being addressed. I still had all of this residual stress and chaos inside of me because of all of the conflict within my relationship, having to move back with my parents, still trying to keep up with my job that I was floundering at. I mean, all this stuff, it was just piling on. And after I remember saying too, I was like, "Oh, it'll just be 6 months. I'll just stay with my parents for 6 months, get a little rest in there, and then I'll, move out and have my own life again." I thought that's what was gonna happen, and that's not what happened. I just continued to go downhill. And I remember it was December of 2014. I'd been broken up for a year and a half, living with my parents for a year and a half, and I I was looking forward to the end of the year because I was gonna be able to take, like, 11 days off, and I was just like, "Oh, you can do it." I had to do year-end invoices because I was a accounts receivable manager, and so I had to do all the year-end closeout invoicing, and I just wasn't getting there. Like, the symptoms were getting worse and louder, and I was having trouble at that point just even looking at my computer. I would get, really big dizzy spells and vertigo, and the screen would get blurry. I couldn't see the screen. I was having, like, reactions to just looking at my computer screen, and so I just kept telling myself, "All right, just try a little bit harder, just do it." I brought work home, kept trying to do work from home, and then 2 weeks before Christmas, I was rear-ended at a stoplight at very low speed. It was just a very little minor bump, but I did have whiplash, and I may have had a mild concussion, but I didn't know that I had a mild concussion because I felt my brain slosh in my head, which was really gross, and, went to a chiropractor 2 times and thought I was fine and continued to decline, but I did not connect it with the accident, though now I look back and I realize that was part of the issue. But so all that extreme stress was, still going on in my body. I'm still trying to figure out how to survive work. Then I get hit from behind, and that, activates my nervous system even more. And there was just a moment when I just, boom, I just hit a wall and my nervous system fractured. Like everything that I'd experienced up to that point became nothing. It was so minor compared to the chaos that my body ended up in. Um, and it was beyond description. But I will try to describe it for you anyway, because, um, yeah, I had so many hypersensitivities come online. So it was like my nervous system just became reactive to everything. I was sensitive to light. I couldn't tolerate heat, loud sounds, smells, movement. I couldn't drive in the car. At one point, my mom tried to drive me to work, and I started to black out in the car. I couldn't handle, like, people, touching me. I had visual sensitivities. I got to the point where if I just tried to read words on a page, I'd start to black out. I would Yeah, I couldn't watch TV. I couldn't listen to books. I couldn't read. I couldn't do anything but lay in my bed and stare at the ceiling and try to stay conscious. Like, I couldn't think a negative thought. If I thought of something scary or negative, I'd start to black out. So I would sit and think of positive mantras. I would visualize positive words on the wall or the ceiling. I would look at I became very good friends with all the characters I found in my textured ceiling. It was like cloud watching, but texture watching. Um, it was awful. I had, my blood pressure was crazy. It was very, very low, and I'd have all these heart rate fluctuations. I had digestive issues. I had like really bad, painful gastritis, and gastroparesis is, which is where you eat and it just doesn't move. Like your body's just not digesting anymore. So that was painful. And then I had extreme nausea for, 24/7 for like 10 months straight, just like horrendous nausea. My body was twitching all the time. I had convulsions. I would just be laying there and my body would like just do weird convulsion things. I'd get these electrical shocks from what felt like my brain to my heart. Um, I had severe insomnia. I was in a cold sweat all the time, just drenched in sweat. Um, and then the fatigue was just beyond. It just felt like your body was at 10% power and weakness. I couldn't stand up without passing out actually. So many different things. Like I was a mess. I couldn't function. It was terrifying. And yeah, so a lot of overwhelming symptoms and chaos inside.
Yeah, we spent the last 4 or 5 episodes. I think we've done 4. And we've talked about sympathetic nervous system, various things that come into our world like spiritual trauma and how our body and mind react. And I think this conversation is a beautiful place to show what that looks like in the life of a real human being. And um, I think some people in our audience, I tend to be one of these people where earlier in life, I mentioned this one of the earlier episodes we did, but earlier in life, whenever anybody was having a hard time in my head, and some of the voices around me would give the messaging of if that person would just get out of bed and just make a go of it and put one foot in front of the other and put their best foot forward. There's all these cliches and things we say to someone because we all of us want to see the people we love and care about. We want to see them have a good life. And if it's a place of employment, our boss, the person who employs us, wants to have us be as productive as possible. And so in every realm of life, either out of love or out of responsibility, everybody is begging us to just do what needs to be done and smile about it and be okay. And you've been hinting, or in some ways being very direct to our audience, saying like, hey, there's a group of you, and it's a much larger group than the small group of you think it is. There's a large group of folks who have pain, who have fatigue, who have intrusive thoughts that limit their ability to be as high functioning as loved ones or those who want you to be productive. What they're willing to sort of tolerate and what they want to see improve, either out of good wishes for the person or out of needing them, like I said, to be more productive. And as you've been speaking about your story, you're indicating to the audience, hopefully there's a bunch of folks, and I know to one degree or another, this is going to be true, that there's folks who are listening to you talk and going like, I've dealt with some of that, or I've got a sister who's dealt with that, or I've got an employee or an employer, or, they know situations in their life where these kinds of things are happening. And you spoke to what that felt like, what the symptoms of that were, and why it was so overwhelming. But I want to ask if this is the low point. You call it a collapse. You speak to how little ability you had to even just get out of bed and just do the normal day-to-day functions of eating and going to work. What else do you want to say about that? Because it sounds like a low moment, one that I've never had. There are others out there who haven't, and there are other folks who are listening and going, yeah, I've had something like that. What else do you want to say about this low moment, this collapse of yours?
There are varying degrees to how these type of symptoms can show up for people. Mine was extreme. And you don't hear from the extreme people because a lot of people who have extreme illness sometimes don't get well enough to tell their story. So, so yeah, mine's an extreme case, but there are lots and lots and lots of people who have all kinds of different symptoms that show up in these different ways and that are probably connected to their nervous system or stress or whatever. And I'll go more into that as we go along. And I'm also going to do, we want to do an episode talking about the mind body connection and about the things that ultimately help me to heal. So I hope people will stay tuned for that because I'm telling you all the ways that it manifested, what it looked like, kind of what led up to it. And then I want to talk about how I got out of it because that's the part that matters. I want people to understand part of why I'm sharing such an extreme story is to give people the hope that even something this extreme can be healed. Um, and like you talk about, like I wasn't able to like really like before the collapse, I could function well enough to take care of myself, feed myself, go to work, do all that kind of stuff. But after the collapse, I was helpless. I needed my mom was caretaking for me. She had to make my meals. I couldn't. She tried to get like a potty chair in the room, and that was the one thing I said I can't. Like I just couldn't go there, and so I crawled to the bathroom. I wasn't able to shower for 10 days straight, and this was after stress sweating. It was not good. Uh, but I couldn't. There were so many things that I couldn't do, and I was never a person who was not able to like, I was actually very functional through most of my illness, and meaning that you wouldn't have known that I was dealing with all this. It was invisible. They call it an invisible illness because you can't see it, and I masked really well. So anyone looking at me from the outside would have had no idea how much I was challenged, how much I was dealing with. But as soon as I collapsed, there was no escaping it. It was obvious I was not well. And and I was helpless and there was a lot going on. So again, everybody there are varying degrees of things that can happen to people that can show up in different ways. So this is one extreme version of that. Mm, yeah, does that answer your question?
It does. I imagine in you and anyone else who deals with something that is lasted this many years and seems to just be getting worse and worse. Again, you go back to your childhood and young adulthood, it's there, but you're functioning. Not at the level you want to be, but you're functioning. And now you hit this moment where, you call it a collapse. You can't do the day-to-day things that need to be done. And I can only imagine that the if I say what is the thing you're most scared of at this time, I know the answer isn't to die. That's not the thing that's most scary because in some ways that's the relief to this path that has no end and for which no one can give you any uh framing by which you can even get a reasonable interpretation of what's happening to you so that you can make sense of it. So say whatever you want to say there, but the question that's in there is what are you most afraid of as this has hit this point?
Yeah, I mean, the simple answer to that is, losing control. I remember I always call it the abyss of nothingness because it felt like I was free falling. Like, it just felt like, "Oh, my body can't get worse than this," and then it would get worse and it would get worse, and it just you felt like it was a complete loss of control. There was this cavern of nothingness that you were just falling and falling and falling, and you never knew where you're gonna hit bottom, and so that was the fear. It was the fear of forever falling and losing complete control.
Yeah. In everyone's story that we're now on the backside of this and we can see that the person has had things get better. Everyone that was in that place that you were in, they have a breaking point. They have a thing that shifts. Something changes. There's this moment where it is that free fall into the abyss that you speak of, and then whether it's a gradual thing over a long period of time or whether it's instantaneous, something happens that changes you and it shifts you into another direction. And so what was the thing that happened? And and say whatever you want to say about that.
Yeah, so the collapse was the big awakening, and it was I remember I remember thinking, "You're either gonna die or you're gonna figure this out." And again, because I'm stubborn and I have this thing inside me, I I was determined. I kept telling myself, "No, we're gonna figure this out. We're gonna heal. We're gonna meet this, whatever it is. What we'll find a solution." That didn't mean I felt like that all the time. There were definitely days I had doubts and had meltdowns and felt like I was never gonna heal, which was very frustrating. But I just started with small things. When I and actually this was the best training ground for me ever in a kind of a weird way. But when I was having the moments where anything would make me black out, I was just desperate to stay conscious. And so it was great brain retraining, meaning that I'm not a ruminator. I'm so good at being able to sort of redirect my thoughts if they're going to a scary place. And that was because of this experience I had. I I basically anytime I had a negative thought come up, I would just redirect it. And so I would, the first thing I did was like lots of positive mantras, kept believing that I was going to get better. Kind of did some, I guess, what we would call meditation. I was doing actually orienting practices, which I learned about those later, but I was sort of naturally doing orienting, which means I would look around my space and just find ways to feel safe in the space that I was in. I did a ton of woo-woo stuff, all kinds of this is where I got into sort of energy work and spiritual stuff and trying to, like I said, I had sort of identified that there were traumatizing moments in my life, and I thought, "Oh, these were the things that caused all my stress, so if I can just get rid of all the negative emotions from all those events, then I will, like, I'll get better." Like, that's what it is, that's the problem. So I approached it from this place of sort of trying to get the negative out and bring the positive in, which is not a bad thing in and of itself, but that kind of really wasn't the formula that helped me heal. But it did make me feel like I was sort of moving towards healing. So it gave me a little bit of comfort. It gave me a little bit of hope. I did a ton of meditation. I did a lot of manifestation stuff where, if you just believe it, you'll heal. Right. And so I focused on mindset a lot and that got me so far, but it didn't ultimately, end up healing me. But it gave me something to do for several years while I while I was trying to, slowly calm my body down, I guess.
You you had you'd looked into self-help, you'd seen health professionals, you'd gotten folks to do tests and tell you what the problem was and put you on courses to for that to correct medicines and yet here you hit a moment where you start to sense there's hope again. And what makes this moment different than all those ones before where people were offering solutions and paths to healing that ended up not coming to fruition? Why is this moment different?
I think because I had less like, the only thing I was focused on at this point was healing. I lost the ability to work. I literally I one day I just couldn't go to work, and I couldn't even when I collapsed, I couldn't even call my boss to tell him I couldn't come to work. My mom had to. I couldn't speak on the phone. So, I was that sick. So, at this point, it was, the job's gone. I can't worry about that anymore. All I have to think about is getting better. There's nothing else that's on my plate. And so I had a lot of time, a lot of space. Still couldn't, I mean, it was months and months and months before I was able to even read to get new information about, how I could heal. But eventually I started opening up to different ideas, and started to do a couple of different things that started to shift things a bit. So, and a lot of those were connected more to like the emotional mind body stuff.
Yeah, so let's talk mind body for a moment. Your nervous system through this entire time period is giving you symptoms. It's affecting your thoughts. It's limiting your belief that things are okay or that they're going to get better. Um, what what shifts your nervous system out of this dark place? What what does that look like to get on to the path, even in the very beginning stages, to get on the path of healing?
Well, so many things. I think the first one was learning to be kind to myself, slowing down. I did have one thing to just note, like, your nervous system is impacted by every type of stress. So, emotional stress, physical stress, mental stress, environmental stress, all of it affects your nervous system the same. And when your nervous system collects enough stress over time, your capacity to handle stress and function well in the world just shrinks, right? So, I had a bucket of stress from many different places. Not, obviously I talked about the biggest ones, trauma in childhood, being a hypersensitive kid, difficulties that I went through in adolescence, a difficult relationship, and all of that was in my bucket. But I also had some things in there that were physical. So one of the things that I did that did help move the needle a little bit was something called the cavitation surgery, because I had some infection in my jaw bones from getting my wisdom teeth pulled. Sometimes when they extract a tooth, they won't clean out there's a ligament that needs to be removed that most dentists don't remove. And if they leave that behind, the tooth won't get the message that it needs to close up and heal. And so there'll be like a pocket left behind, which can harbor bacteria and all kinds of different infection. And that's what happened to me. And so I had this low grade hidden infection in my jaw where
How old were you when you had your wisdom teeth removed?
I was 21 or 22.
Do you think that had played at least some small part all along the way in this undiscoverable, unfindable root cause of all of this? That, and again, I know it's not limited to that, but it seems like at least one idea would be that had been uh, a low grade infection all that time that had impacted you.
Yes, I do. And it's the same as, right now, you and I both have allergies, and I've been so tired just having, like,
Mm.
these allergies. I'm in a new location, and things are different for my nerve or my, immune system. So when you have, like, a low-grade immune response, it can cause you to feel more fatigue. And when I got the cavitation surgery, so I had the cavitations, there were these infections, and they went in and cleaned them all out and put new stem cells in there to help my body be stimulated to grow new bone. And after I got that surgery done, immediately my symptoms of sore throat. So I had a lot of like immune reactions where I was like constant chronic sore throat went away. So I know that that was connected directly to that. And I do think that addressing that and sort of lifting the weight off of that infection in my body allowed it to sort of rebound a little bit more easily. So it was definitely impacting me. And I can see it back even, I look at when my symptoms started to show up, and it was around that time. I remember feeling a little bit of fatigue when I was in my equestrian school in West Virginia. And then 2 years later, when I was in California, all the symptoms kind of started to show up. So yes, definitely was part of it. And so, that cavitation surgery was really helpful. After that, I started to notice a little bit of energy came back into my system. At the same time, it was like 3 weeks after I had that surgery, I moved over to my brother's house. He had an apartment above his garage, and I stayed in that for about 6 months by myself and got a little bit of relief from family pressure and stuff like that. And I think that was helpful. And then I started learning about my nervous system. I started learning about trauma and how to work with trauma in a way that was different than I'd ever learned or understood before. I began working with a trauma-informed therapist who understood about trauma. You started to utilize nervous system regulation tools and different mind-body concepts. And then, like, slowly over time, I just gently started to push myself to get back into the world, but in a titrated way, in a way that was within my capacity, not like, forcing myself, but just slowly trying to remind myself like, "Oh, maybe I can do this or maybe I can do that." And,
yeah, that started to sort of shift things for me. I started to kind of move upwards into more capacity, less symptoms, more confidence in myself, more trust in my body again.
What role? So you mentioned childhood. You talked about this really unhealthy relationship that you were in way longer than it was good for you. What role did trauma you think play in being sick, in your collapse? It seems like it also, just like the tooth issue, it seems like it played a significant part.
Yes, it did. So trauma, essentially, I I grew up in a home with two very loving parents who also had experienced trauma in their lives, as many people do. I really, this is just my belief. I don't think there are that many people that really experience truly healthy upbringings. I just don't think that we've known what true healthy upbringings should be. So, there was a challenging dynamic between my parents, and I developed codependency patterns, and there was a lack of boundaries in my family. And so that kind of disconnects you from yourself. So that was a formative stuff where, like, I didn't even know how to sort of trust my own sense of self, or I was constantly putting energy into how other people were responding to me and feeling, part of codependency is, this is what how I always describe it. Codependency is, I'm not okay unless you're okay. Right. So if someone else is not okay in the room, it becomes your responsibility to harmonize that person or help them to feel okay. And so you suppress everything that you feel or think about yourself in order to make that person okay so that you could feel okay inside. So that takes a lot of energy. So that was a foundational piece of what trauma created for me. And then also, it sensitized my brain to be hypervigilant. So early on, I think I was also, this is an interesting tidbit, but if you can grow up with a hypersensitized brain if your parent had trauma. So it can be passed down epigenetically through, if your parent went through something difficult, then their gene expression gets shifted, and then you inherit that and become, you start out life a lot more sensitized. And, my father went through a lot of childhood trauma. He had polio as a child. He was hospitalized a lot. He had a difficult birth, a lot of formative things that I think caused him to go through the world a little differently than most people. So anyway, all of that played into it. And so, I show up in this world, I have a hypersensitized brain. And then the hypervigilance, it sort of disrupted my brain's ability to interpret my body sensations, my environment, and my relationships with other people in an accurate way. That's something that can happen to people who've been traumatized, is you have this thing called the insula inside your brain that helps you determine how to respond to messages that your nervous system's picking up. So like if your nervous system is scanning the environment, or if it's scanning your internal sensations, or it's scanning one nervous system to another nervous system, that's a part of your brain that helps to decide, like, oh, is that dangerous or is that safe? Is like, and if it's dangerous, like how much do I respond to it? Do I do a big response? Do I do a small response? It's a really important part. And when you have trauma, that part of your brain it changes. It becomes so hypersensitized that it would rather be overly cautious and protect you too much than not enough. And so it's almost like another way to describe it is, if you had a fire alarm that was going off, was way too sensitive and was going off if, like you blew out a candle. That's kind of what my nervous system did. It started to react to things that were harmless in a way that said, "Oh my gosh, this is so dangerous." So it lost its ability to perceive things accurately, both inside my body when I was scanning my, internal body sensations, when I was scanning my environment to see if I was safe or not safe in the environment, or when I was even scanning another person's nervous system to see if I was safe or not safe with that person. That's social anxiety, right? Uh, Reacting to your environment. If you have even allergies, I would say,
That's your nervous system perceiving something in the environment is dangerous when it's probably harmless. We were talking about this the other day because I was like, what is the deal with these allergies? Because technically speaking, pollen is not inherently dangerous to a human, right? It's not actually bad for you, but some of us react to pollen. Our immune system gets turned on because our brain has perceived that something, this pollen is actually not good for us. But to other people, it's completely harmless. So we know it's not inherently harmful, but it's just the way that we perceive it. So my brain, my brain became hypersensitized from the trauma, and therefore that led to it misinterpreting cues in the environment or in my body or between people as dangerous. And then it turned on symptoms.
I'm going to add something here up on the screen. I want to note to the audience, we've talked about this before in episodes far into the past on this podcast, but you mention it, the trauma when your parents, your grandparents, like it is passed along genetically. It's on some level to the point where we can do the research and study people that if they incur a really traumatic event, if it's a mom, for instance, the children she has that are born before the event occurred and the children born after the event occurred handle similar events very differently. They have something in their genetics that trauma is passed on. And from an evolutionary perspective, this makes sense, because if we as a tribal people incur some event, now that is registered in our bodies. So now future generations will be able to handle that event some other way.
Yep.
Be able to handle it differently. And so there are evolutionary benefits to information of that sort being passed along. And I'll just note that the science backs that up. And so I think that was interesting, and that there's science behind it. And so it's not just the traumas that you incur, but it's the traumas that your parents incur. And it's also the traumas your 16th great grandparents incur. As former Mormons, one of the things Mormons are often told to do is to do their genealogy. And when I left the faith, genealogy became something I no longer worked on. That said, I'm still glad I did it. It still gave me the ability to know some of the stories of the people who came before me, and to know why maybe I react and respond to the world the way I do. And it informs me about who the people were before me and what I want to do to be different than them, to change the patterns of their, from their lives to mine, while also being grateful that they did the best they could with the things that they had incurred. And so I only put that up for that reason. I'm going to take that back down. And so we're skipping over. So there's this big void right now. The void is your actual healing. And we're going to save much of that conversation for our next episode, when we go into what were the things that you utilized to heal and what did healing look like. But I at least want to give you a moment that we don't just pass over it. Is there anything you'd want to say here before we talk about sort of the turning point of becoming a coach and helping others, what you've learned from your experience? What do you want to say here in this moment about the healing itself?
After the cavitation surgery and moving into my brother's apartment and having a little bit of that space to sort of regroup and figure things out, I remember actually moving into that apartment was a challenge because before that, my mom had still been, doing all my shopping. She had been helping me make meals, and it was still a little scary for me to sort of have to take on those roles because, I was still having difficulty standing up for certain, long periods of time. I'd feel like I was going to pass out. And I was still really afraid of my symptoms. You'd have some good days and then, really bad days. You'd do too much and then you'd pay for it, and you'd feel like you had to constantly monitor your activity levels to make sure that you didn't push yourself into what, a lot of people term a crash. So there was a lot of this push crash stuff still going on. And I knew that after I did the cavitation surgery that it was supposed to be about 6 months before I would notice any big results. They said, don't think about anything, just give it 6 months and then see what happens. And that's actually the exact trajectory that it went on. I
slowly over time, I remember I got worse after I did it. And then I started to sort of build up a little bit. And then I had to sort of learn how to be independent because my mom wasn't helping me with meals. And that began to challenge my nervous system to start remembering that maybe it could do things. Maybe I really was okay. So it was almost my own unconscious brain retraining. But it was very helpful. I mean, I started to gain a little bit more confidence. And then my parents moved back in with me for a while because the reason why I ended up moving to my brother's was because my parents were about to sell their house and they needed to do some remodeling, and I was unwell. I was too unwell to handle the loud noises, so we put me over at my brother's for a while. And then as soon as my parents got the house ready, they were going to move over temporarily and stay in that apartment as well until they were ready to build their new home. And so there was a time that they moved in with me into this two-bedroom small apartment, and that was very challenging emotionally because it was my space and all my stuff. And now, I'd had this time alone, and now I've got my parents here, and my dad had just retired. So there's a lot going on. So I was in that situation for about a year, but continued to explore different ideas about the nervous system and about trauma. And I just kept seeing different patterns because I was in this experience where I'm watching myself interact with my parents in these different ways. And that gave me a lot of awareness and insight. And then they moved out and started building their house, and I was left back in the apartment where I again had more space to just keep exploring new things. And I learned about lots of different modalities where mind body connection kind of stuff, where I understood the power of your brain. And it, just to be fair, it took me a very, very long time to buy into this. I had so much resistance around the idea that my brain could be turning on symptoms. It seemed implausible. It felt blaming. I felt like, like, oh, does that mean it's all in my head? And some people, when they talked about that mind body connection, would almost frame it in that way, that it's a psychosomatic, or it's all in your head, or it's not real. And so I had this resistance because I knew my symptoms were real. Like, they weren't something I was making up. So it took me a long time to kind of really understand that that piece of it. But I continued to mostly work on nervous system regulation, focusing on how to bring cues of safety to my body and my brain and my nervous system. And because I knew that the more safety I felt, the more regulated my nervous system was, the more my symptoms would sort of dissipate. And so that was my focus for a long time. And then I found, oh, what was it? There were so many different aspects that came into play for me. But I found a therapist, actually. So I started working with a trauma-informed therapist, and that was very, very helpful for me. I've told this story before, but I remember the first day I worked with this therapist, it was the moment I understood the power of co-regulation, the power of going from dysregulated to regulated, and how that translated to symptoms for me. And I remember having our first appointment, and it was in like 2021, and it was a in-person appointment. And I sat down with her, and she just listened. She didn't get squeamish about my story. She didn't judge me. She didn't flinch. And I just remember thinking, like, wow, like somebody besides me can hold this, can help me hold this. Like, I don't have to carry all this on my own. And walked out of that session just feeling like present in my body. I felt like a lot of times I'd feel like really dissociated, like I was kind of like half in my body, half out of my body, really woozy, a lot of dizziness and brain fog. But all of a sudden, I just felt sharp, just in my body, present. I walked out to my car. I looked at the horizon. The whole world was in crisp view. I felt capable. I wanted to move into the world. I remember just thinking like, I want to go to the store, which at the time, going to the store was still quite difficult for me. And I went to a store that usually caused a lot of symptoms, and I felt fabulous. I was, looking at people and talking to people and just feeling like I was a normal human being. It was so interesting. And I realized, like, wow, I'm regulated. That's what this is. This whole nervous system thing's like a really big deal. Like, it really works. It really, like, there's something to this. And, my nervous system didn't hold that. It stayed for about 3 hours, and then it kind of went back into its default mode. But that was a really, really important moment for me. And I continued to work on my nervous system, again, bringing that safety, addressing different aspects of trauma, which, by the way, doesn't mean, like, when you address trauma, you don't have to go back and relive the traumatic experience. That's not necessarily required, because that experience still lives inside of you and comes out in the present moment. So it's about learning how to be with the activation in your system. It's about learning how to bring safety to different states of your nervous system, whether your nervous system's going into high gear or it's going into low gear or you're in freeze. And as you bring safety and presence, and you let yourself know, like, oh, okay, this is an uncomfortable situation, but it's not bad, it's not dangerous or wrong. That's what starts to repattern it. That's what starts to help your nervous system to release and learn that it can trust to be in regulation and safety again. So I did a lot of that work. And then I eventually found pain reprocessing therapy. And pain reprocessing therapy was originally, created for people who had chronic pain conditions, which I did have pain, but it can also be applied to different symptoms that are generated from your brain. And when I say generated, I mean that, again, when your brain is hypervigilant because of chronic stress or trauma, it becomes hypersensitized, and it will unconsciously, this is not something you do consciously at all, but it will unconsciously um, label or misperceive that something going on in your body is something bigger than it is. This happens if you break your leg, for example. If you have a broken bone, your brain will be like, wow, there's a problem. It's dangerous. I've got to turn on a pain signal so that you know not to walk on this leg. And that pain signal is being originated from your brain. It's not in your leg, it's in your brain always. Sometimes your brain can make a mistake when it's deciphering or it's noticing something in your body, and it can perceive that something is a problem when it's not, and it will turn on a symptom as a way to get your attention. And so when you've had a lot of trauma, the brain's hypersensitized, it makes a lot more mistakes. So that was what was happening with me. And so I learned this concept of pain reprocessing therapy, of how to repattern when this goes wrong, when you have something, when you have a symptom that's being turned on and there's no physical damage, there's no structural damage, there's not a fundamental physiological reason for the problem. The symptom is still real, but it's based on a false reading by your brain. So there's this pain reprocessing therapy that helps you to repattern that, and you learn how to turn off those symptoms just by bringing your presence. You use mindfulness, you use safety. It's a really gentle but powerful process. And so I learned about that, got trained in it, and that's when I finally got it. Like, that's when it really, really clicked. All of the stuff that I'd sort of been hearing about but didn't really fully believe, I saw it happen in real time. I had a shoulder issue that was going on that was very, very painful, and I'd been ignoring for 2 years, because even though my shoulder was painful, it was literally the bottom of my list of complaints. And I utilized pain reprocessing therapy on it, and it just instantly went away. And I was convinced that I had, like, a torn rotator cuff, or I had something physiological going on in my shoulder. And it ended up being that it was my brain. So it was so interesting to have that experience. And so I learned about that, and it just opened up my whole world. And so it's just been a slow progression ever since then, of just continually helping my nervous system feel safe and learn how I can continue to expand my capacity to do things, to get back into my life in old ways and also in new ways. I've challenged myself to do things I never thought I would do, but I am doing those things. And I think it's really exciting, because it's made me feel like, for the first time, I I don't have limitations. I don't, or if I do, I have ways to work with them that are really healthy, and so I get excited about what's next in my life.
Yeah, I wanna follow that up. People have things that are traumatic in their life. They have hardships, they got bumps in the road, they get better, they deal with it, they move on with life. You did something different, which was you decided to take the things that you learned, go get certified to be able to use some of those tools and to be able to help people who have been through things, at least in some ways, similar to the things that you've been through. Talk about what that was. Like, what was different for you that you decided to utilize your journey and the tools that you learned in order to help others?
Well, even when I was sick and still didn't have answers, there was some part of me that just kept thinking, I'm going to figure this out. And when I figure this out, I'm going to help other people because I knew there was so little available to sort of explain what was happening. And I felt so helpless. And I didn't like the idea of other people having to feel that way if I ever figured it out. So there was always a determination that I was going to do something with it. And originally I thought I would do like health coaching or I'd do something in the functional medicine world. But when I realized those really weren't the answers for me, and it was more about, addressing trauma and the nervous system, then I got really curious about what I could do from that place. And so I looked into coaching certifications that were trauma informed because I knew like that was a really important aspect. And I found this super cool course that certified me as a trauma recovery coach. So that was a foundational thing. And once I got my coaching certification, I started adding other aspects. So I did the pain reprocessing therapy certification, and then I did something called the Safe and Sound Protocol training. And so those are things that I offer in my coaching practice now, which I think are just such a beautiful combination of elements because I sort of distilled it down to the things that actually work. Um, yeah, and that makes me really, really excited. It was, let's see, I collapsed in 2015. It was like January 2015. And before that, I'd been sick since 2003. So that's 20 some years of dealing with this kind of chronic illness stuff to varying degrees. And I just fumbled through life and I didn't have any answers. And so for me to come full circle, to have found healing in many ways beyond where I started out, like at least emotionally and mentally, I it's so exciting to me to be able to have enough information to offer people that really translates to healing, that really answers the questions of why is this happening to me? What is this about? What does this mean? And how do I get better? It's just the coolest thing in the world. So yeah, I don't know. I was motivated because of what happened to me. And then as I've learned more along the way, now I'm just excited. It's such a fun thing for me to talk about and to teach people. I think it can change your life. I feel like it's a calling. It's something that I feel like I'm supposed to do with my life because of what I've gone through. And also, along the way, I had a lot of wonderful practitioners that I worked with, but I don't think there was a single one who'd actually gone through physical illness. And so one of the things that I'm able to bring to the table for my clients is I understand what it actually feels like to be there. I understand that. And I can also sort of give people the hope that like, hey, I was able to get out of this and you can get out of this. Like it's really possible. It's not just theoretical. Like it really works.
Um, what would you want to say about the health industry, medical professionals, health professionals? I've watched you close up, and I've watched you help people, and I've seen people reach out to you. They're at the end of their rope. They've tried everything. They've exhausted all resources and avenues for assistance. They come to you having done all of that, and they're just at the end. They've tried everything, and so now what they're looking to try is something where instead of saying, let's find out what's causing this, instead, let's just deal with the fact that your mind and body are presenting symptoms that maybe we don't have a perfect explanation for. Maybe we'll never have that. And then I see you helping those folks and them getting better, reporting, getting back into, just like you did, getting back into feeling safe in their world, symptoms subsiding, and they're able to enjoy their lives again. So, what would you want to say about uh, the way the world tries to deal with this, the way the health industry, medical professionals try to deal with this, and maybe what the limitations of that is? Not that folks shouldn't utilize those avenues; they certainly should.
Mm.
But if they've been doing that for years, getting nowhere, maybe it's time to try something else.
Yes. The medical industry does the best that they can, and it is so important for people to, if they've got symptoms, if they don't understand what's going on with them, go get it checked out, go see a doctor, have them run all the tests they need to run. And if it comes back that those tests are normal and they don't know what's going on, that's just because they don't understand this other aspect. They are not trained in the brain driven stuff. They just don't know about it. They don't get training in it. So I had a lot of well meaning doctors, but the most they could offer me was, gosh, I'm so sorry, I don't know, you know. And so and then it makes you feel crazy. So the medical community does their best. But what I want people to know is that if you go and you do have all these tests and they can't find anything wrong, I want you to know that your symptoms are real. They're real physical symptoms. This isn't all in your head. Even if you get a label of like psychosomatic or whatever, that doesn't mean your symptoms are all in your head. It's real. This is really happening to you. These symptoms are often extremely debilitating. The degree of suffering that somebody with, you know, severe forms of this illness goes through can be worse than many forms of other severe illnesses that get a lot more attention. So it's real, and there is a treatment. So if you've ever gotten the diagnosis of CFS-ME, or of fibromyalgia, of Lyme disease, of long COVID, of all kinds of other debilitating symptoms, if you've ever gotten a diagnosis where they've put the word functional in front of it, or idiopathic, or there's a couple of different names, but there are just a long list of symptoms. And in our next episode, I have some examples of like what types of symptoms can be in this category. It's huge. It's so many. So you know, chronic pain conditions where they've checked you out and they can't find the reason for it. There's no explanation for your pain. That's often a mind, body, or brain driven condition. And it is a real condition. It's real pain. It's all the same as anything else that could happen to you. But there is a treatment for it. And it's just that the medical system doesn't have access to that because it's a little bit more complex than how they treat things. They typically give you a medication, but this isn't something you can get a medication for. This is something that you have to utilize a lot more. You have to address different aspects. So
We're about ready to move into the closing end of this conversation, and I want to ask you one more question about healing, and then we can start to work towards wrapping up. What else do you want to say about the foundational pieces of healing? There are so many tools out there, things that are effective for self-help, inner development, growth. But when it comes to chronic fatigue or mind-body symptoms or issues, is there anything else you want to say about what the foundational parts of that healing, what healing? Let me say it differently. Which of those tools or what kinds of tools are incorporated into that healing?
mm, yes. So awareness, number one. That's the biggest thing. That's the biggest tool. Safety, nervous system regulation, brain retraining or neural retraining is what they call it. Acceptance, taking the pressure off, stress reduction, self-compassion is a huge one. It doesn't get enough attention. If anybody's ever looked into Kristen Neff's work, she's written a lot of stuff and studies the power of self-compassion. It's one of the best ways that you can actually retrain your nervous system and bring regulation to your system because it gives you a cue of safety. Courage, curiosity, we talk about that a lot in all aspects of healing. It's huge. Other aspects are addressing codependency because there is a personality for people who have these types of conditions, by the way. Codependency is an aspect that's common in many people. And then finally, restoring healthy boundaries is also a big one.
Love it. Okay. So, a lot of people in this place who have tried everything, they and you talked about this in your own journey, but they experience hopelessness. I think there comes a point for all of us that we can only take so much, and we get to a point where we're ready to give up. And I want to give you a moment to speak to folks who could be listening to this conversation, who are dealing with things in their life that are overwhelming because you spent time in your life being overwhelmed and not having a path out and having to sit in in the, the word I always say is discomfort, but it's way more significant than that in a journey like yours. What do you want to say to people who are experiencing hopelessness, having tried everything and aren't able to find some solution to their problem, whether their problem is feeling things like chronic fatigue or dealing with trauma that there's never been any path to get out of, or whether it's having to stay in an unhealthy system? What do you want to say to folks who in this moment are feeling hopeless about their situation?
Whether you have trauma and you're experiencing emotional repercussions from that, or you've had chronic stress, trauma, or challenging experiences in your life and you are having physical manifestations from that, I promise you healing is possible. It's possible to heal from many, many symptoms and conditions. It's possible to shift how you feel about your symptoms to find more safety in your symptoms. If your symptoms are something that you struggle with and you feel a lot of anxiety or stress around, because when we have physical symptoms, then that adds a secondary layer of stress on top of the stress we're already feeling. You can reduce the fear that you feel, and you can learn to trust your body again. Um, and there are so many incredible tools out there to help you function in life and to find a more balanced way to live. Like there's just so much out there that can not only alleviate your symptoms, but that can help you to be the person that you maybe feel like you were always meant to be, but couldn't connect to. That's what I feel like for me. Like one of the biggest things for me is there was always something inside of me that felt like I always knew I was smart. I knew that I had a lot of abilities, but there was just like this wall. There was this thing that was constantly holding me back. And it was this feeling of well, fear. I would say like the biggest thing is fear. And part of addressing a lot of these health issues is it kind of takes you back to yourself. It helps you to reconnect to yourself and develop more of a healthy relationship with yourself so that you learn to trust yourself and self-regulate and move into this world with a lot more confidence and learn to connect to maybe your most authentic self and learn to connect to maybe your purpose in a different way. So I I really don't like that I had to go through what I went through, but even as bad as it was, I look back on it now with so much uh gratitude in a way because it's what finally brought me into who I am right now and I would never trade that for anything.
I want to get into you having a chance to point people towards where they can find your work and resources where they can work with you. But I want to start with, are there any other resources out there that you'd recommend for folks who want to explore the things that we've talked about today? Want to explore those further? What would you suggest people go source resources they would go to or go look into?
Yeah, so there's a couple. So there's a woman who her name is Raylan Eagle, and she has a really cool YouTube channel where she has tons and tons of recovery stories. So that's a great place to go to just hear other people's stories and understand that there is a way out of this. So I will link all of these resources in the description of the YouTube podcast. There's also a book that's really great called The Way Out from Alan Gordon. This is where he talks about the concept of pain reprocessing therapy. And I tell people, like, if you have chronic pain, it's fabulous for that. But even if you have just strange symptoms that are unexplainable that you can't quite put your finger on, you can utilize the same concepts. Whether it's pain or it's a strange symptom, it works the same way in your brain. So he does the most beautiful. He has a beautiful way of sort of like describing and explaining the mind-body connection and the brain's power over all these symptoms. And then there's a really good website from Dr. David Clark. He is a physician who somehow, I mean, he's one of these incredible doctors who sort of sidestepped traditional medicine because they saw the connection between trauma and stress and illness. And they knew that they could only do so much for patients. And so he stepped out of the mainstream and started exploring and investigating this mind-body connection. And he brings legitimacy to it. He brings the legitimacy of a doctor to this work, and has helped in a lot of different studies and works with a lot of other doctors. And so he has an incredible website called Symptomatic Me. It's just symptomatic.me. And I will link that as well. That kind of gives a really good explanation of what these neuroplastic conditions are. That's another term that they call it, is neuroplastic symptoms. And I think that that's really helpful for people to give them a lot of good grounded information.
Yeah, I love it. So let me just say, I'm going to interject something here. I know there's going to be folks out there who have listened to the last 4 or 5 conversations as the Almost Awakened podcast is picked back up again. And they're going to go, why are we having these conversations? This is a channel that is dedicated essentially to providing people the resources of deconstructing their religious faith system. And when I started the Almost Awakened podcast, I don't know what it was, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, something along those lines. When I started at the time, I thought, there's all these things that I do to help people deconstruct, to validate their questions, but then they get to the other side. They've been traumatized by religion, they've deconstructed it, they've stepped away. And I always wanted to offer something on the other side of things too, to give people the resources during the deconstruction, or especially post-deconstruction, to build a really healthy second half of life. And part of that is helping people to deal with trauma. In the same way that somebody is affected by traumatic events that someone else did to them, in this instance, it's often trauma that's imposed on them by an unhealthy spiritual system. And that trauma leads to our body reacting and responding in certain ways. There are times that I would come out of church and my hand would just be shaking. There were moments where I would be up all night, unable to go to sleep, often in tears, crying, trying to figure out how I was going to untangle all of the ways in which this system had interjected itself into my life, in my relationships with loved ones. There are people who still go to church who are physically in and mentally out. And trauma affects all of us in different ways. And while we'll have a whole host of conversations here on the Almost Awakened podcast, one of the things we wanted to spend some considerable time doing here, especially since Teresa, you've come on board to be the co-host, is to help people understand your expertise. And it's a thing where I'm also in the middle of getting certified as a trauma coach, is to help people understand how trauma affects you, what that might look like, and all the possibilities, so that as we move forward, having other kinds of conversations and begin to show tools and begin to talk about interpersonal communication or what makes a healthy relationship, is to help people sense, like, what is it that you might be feeling, thinking, experiencing that are not ideal for you to live your best life, help you to notice it, and to be able to sense, like, oh, I can do something about that. I don't have to live with these issues in my physical symptoms. I don't have to live with my mind always being weighed down in thought with the things that have happened to me, that there are ways that we can deal with that, process things, and come out the other side better and healthier. And so I want to give you a chance here to say anything else you want to say about that diatribe I just went into. And then I want to give you a chance to close telling us about you and your work and where people can find you.
Yeah, thank you. I do think it's important for people to know there are many ways that trauma can manifest, whether you're deconstructing or you've gone through other types of trauma. We had the episode on religious trauma, and it's no different than any other type of trauma. And I've I've encountered many people in the post-Mormon space who have a lot of expressions from being in an unhealthy religious system that often show up in physical ways. And, again, I've said this before, but like when I first met Bill, he was like, "Oh, nobody has this kind of stuff." Like he didn't really think that many people suffered from chronic illnesses or strange symptoms, or you know what I mean? And as we talk to people, there are more and more people that he's known for years that have come out and said, "Oh my gosh, I deal with this." And I hear it all the time. This is not an uncommon thing. And there was somebody who said something that I thought was so profound. It was something along the lines of, a healthy person has 1,000 dreams and a person with chronic illness has only one. And it's so true. Like having the component of chronic illness on top of trauma, on top of stress, on top of deconstruction, on top of whatever it is that you have on your plate, it limits your ability to address all the rest of it. It weighs you down so much that you feel like you can't get any traction. And at the very least, it just mutes the amount of joy and peace that you can have in your life. And so I want to bring this out to the public, to people who may not be aware of it, so that they can have a name for it, so they can understand, like, wow, maybe this isn't something I have to just cope with for the rest of my life. Maybe there is a way out of this. So I hope this resonates for you. I hope that there's somebody that maybe is struggling with this, that you could share this with, just to get the word out, just to get people to understand that this is a thing. It's real. It's happening to a lot of people. We're all living in a time where there is so much chronic stress in our world. And whether we've had severe trauma or not, just the amount of stress that most people endure on a daily basis can translate into these mind-body conditions. You don't have to have the background that I had. You don't have to have been as hypersensitized as I was. But, these mind-body conditions are very common. And again, when we go into the next episode, I will explain a little bit more about what it looks like, how it shows up, give you more of the background and science around it. It's actually really, really fascinating. So so basically what I do, I am a trauma recovery coach, but I also have other certifications in aspects of mind, body, and nervous system regulation stuff. And so thank you. Bill's putting my website up right there. And so you can find my work through monarchintegrativecoaching.com. And I work primarily with people who have chronic illnesses. And I teach you how to understand why it's happening. I teach you how to find safety. And if there are any things that come from a historical place that are impacting your nervous system, I help you find ways to work with that in the here and now. I am not someone who is going to go back and go over all of your trauma history. That's not what I do. I don't actually find that especially beneficial for most people. And so it's just about giving you skills that you can utilize in the here and now to help you feel safe, to help you regulate your system, to help you know that the past is past and that in this moment, everything is okay. So if you're interested in working with me, you can reach out to me through my website, and I would love to support anybody who feels like I would be a good fit for them.
I love it. I love that. And it's one more way that I think we can help this community of folks who have been on the journey of taking a thing apart and having been hurt by it, and realizing, I think part of that is realizing, like, oh, there were other moments in my life that hurt me too, and affected me, and to give people resources and tools to tackle that. It's been a great conversation, Teresa. And I'm really grateful for the stuff that we put out already. And let me change the screen over. Sorry about that. The things that we put out already in the last few episodes, and I'm really excited for what we're going to do over the coming months as we put out conversations here on the Almost Awakened podcast that, again, offer people an opportunity to have resources and tools that give them a better chance at a healthier second half of life. You and I changed the tagline of the podcast: awake enough to question, grounded enough to grow. Anything else you want to say? Otherwise, we'll close out, and this will be another great conversation, another great episode of the podcast.
I just want to say thank you to you for being generous enough to allow me to share this, for the kindness with which you asked all these questions. It's a tender subject for me. So thank you for just the way you showed up today.
Oh, you're welcome. Folks, please tune in again next week we'll be back. And in that episode, we'll have a conversation about some of the tools that Teresa used and what those did for her and what those might be of help to this community. And we'll talk to everybody then. So far, it seems like most of the time we're releasing these on Sundays. I think it's a nice little day to, if you're out and about doing some things in your yard or doing some running around. I think it's a great chance to hear a conversation that is beneficial to being on this side of things. So we'll see you next Sunday for the next episode of the Almost Awakened podcast. Teresa and I are both grateful for the chance to be able to have you folks listen in, and hope you're enjoying this. Please leave your comments down below. Please like and subscribe to the channel. And I'm really excited to see what we do in the upcoming months.
Thanks for tuning in to the Almost Awakened podcast. For more tools, resources, and real talk about conscious living, visit almostawakened.org. That's almostawakened.org, your resource for waking up